extremist beliefs. So a lot of that was, there's only one way to do this right. And the one way to do it right was my teacher's way. And there was no real questioning it, right? So, in a martial context, if I learned a movement that I didn't think was feasible or just seemed impractical, and I was like, all right, well, I'm gonna change it and practice it in a way that fits me, that was frowned upon, and it was like, no, you can't do that. It's like, why can't I do that? Oh, because the old masters created it this way, and you're not supposed to change it. It's disrespectful. It's this, that, and the other. Meanwhile, he's changing shit on his own. How do I know? Because there's so many inconsistencies with how I learned it the first time. Right? We learn it one way, then he comes and shows us one way and corrects it, and later on down the line it's like, oh no, it's actually like this, or it's actually like this, or it's actually, and it's like everything was just kind of being changed at his whim. So he had the understanding and power to make all of these adjustments because he's holier than thou, and we were just supposed to adapt to him and cater our education to him and how he wants us to be educated. It was never relative to what we really wanted to get from the practice. There was also a lot of like weird spiritual stuff and like energetic stuff that didn't really make any sense to me. Even now, it still just seems like fantasy. And it was just a lot of, yes, um, why would I travel? Why would, and this is shit that he would say, like, why would I travel? Why would I go on vacation? Why would I do this? Why would I do that when I can just meditate and astral project and I can go anywhere I want in my astral form and blah, blah, blah. There are times where he's like, oh, I astral projected and I saw my death date and all this bizarre shit. And it's like, sir, this is not like an anime, dog. Like, this is the real world. And when I was a kid, I I don't know that I believed it, but I was definitely enthralled by the concept, and it felt like something that was not impossible at that time. And this just goes to show you the kind of god complex that we kind of built around him at that point in time, or at least was built around him and ingrained in us to see. And it was just like, yeah, this red flags all the way. Um, then there was other times where it was just like nonsense. There was one move where you do this, you jump, and then break apart this way. And we had a seminar explaining the applications of that form, and he said that move was grabbing somebody's head, cracking their neck, ripping their head off, and then slamming their head into somebody else. And it's just like, at that point in time, I didn't really believe it, but I was just like, wow, that's bizarre. I was just so taken aback by it that I didn't really even know what to think. And we'd have this conversation behind the scenes, like, hey, yo, do you really think that's possible? Like, well, he says if he put his dantian into it, he could do it. I'm just like, I don't think so. And there was other things too. And the thing that really got to me nowadays is looking back at the shit that they taught me when I was a kid. Elementary Shaolin. Like this movement that I covered in the other video. How are you gonna tell a kid that you're grabbing somebody's jaw and ripping that shit out? Like, it doesn't make sense. And then other movements too, like if you're practicing Shaolin 6 and this movement, he said you're going into somebody's gut with your iron palm, grabbing their innards and ripping it out. it just doesn't make any sense, you know. But that's the kind of stuff that he would teach us, and some people would want to get to that point, and those kind of things would build MO, right? It's like, oh yes, this is my motivating operation. I want to get to that point. I want to be able to have, Dr. Zoom's ability to go into somebody and, vibrate my hand through them, and I wouldn't be surprised if that man believed he could time travel. Okay, so there's a whole bunch of like spiritual nonsense, a whole bunch of nonsense about projecting chi and all that stuff. And there was a whole bunch of stuff with just like deviant behavior was just frowned upon, like there was one time, and I was already kind of done with the bullshit. I was just kind of there to try and make change. I'll get into that later. I had started training with my Hung Gar Sifu, and this man opened me up to a whole bunch of new perspectives and really validated my concerns about the way that I was being taught and about the things that I was being taught. And I never even told him, like, hey, Sifu, this is what this guy's telling me. This is what I'm learning. This is the kind of weird stuff he's saying. Is any of this true? He never had to know any of that stuff. Just the way in which he was teaching me led me to believe that I was right. That what I'm learning, how I'm learning, was flawed. And manipulative, really. And so it was like any kind of deviance, you were revoked privileges. Either you wouldn't learn something or you would be kind of cast to the side. And I started to notice this maybe like a year before I decided to call it quits. And this was really because other students were learning things that I wasn't. And one day he would forget and be like, hey, go do this. I'm like, sir, I don't know this. He's like, oh, I thought you did. Like, how do you not remember? How do you remember not? How do you not remember teaching somebody something? Especially like a whole fucking form. It doesn't take like, yes, I teach you 2 movements and then you're done. No, this man said, all right, do the eagle claw forms, multiple forms, mind you. I don't know them. Which one don't you know? Any of them. Oh. And I feel like my deviance, my rebellious attitude towards them and how they operated kind of led them to that conclusion. And I feel like that was kind of them revoking my privileges, revoking what I could learn, what I could do, what I couldn't do. And maybe I'm reading too much into that part, but that's what it felt like. That's what it feels like. Anyhow, back to like this part with my Hung Gar Sifu. It's like, even if it wasn't privileges, it was respect was revoked. So, and this is not going to be relevant for any of you watching this if you're not interested in the martial arts part. So, there's the tiger crane, there's a wah, 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 wah. So in this side punch, at one point, I would go low because I would see like I was going under something and going for a body shot, going for a nut shot, whatever. He's like, why are you doing it like that? I was like, well, explain my rationale. As I can, it's like, this is what my Sifu did explain, or at least he gave it as an option at one point. I don't remember. But he's like, what is he, smoking crack? It's like, why would he change the form? Who the hell is he to change the form? He's not one of the old masters. It's like, sir, the amount of times you've changed forms, or said, oh, I like this way better because X, Y, and Z, your rationale is okay. But when it's somebody else, it doesn't make sense. And then he's like, oh, why would you go under when you're gonna, this is one of the things that could happen to you. I'm like, I don't disagree with your point. You're right. If I dug down like that, a lot of things happen. I get a knee to the face, whatever. How many of your forms do the same exact shit? How would I know? Because I know them. I've seen it. I've practiced it. So yes, we have done the same exact thing. I understand. But the fact that because you didn't make that decision to make that change or make that adaptation or introduce that modification or potentiality for application, someone is smoking crack, somebody is stupid, somebody is a nobody because he's not one of the old masters, but you are? I don't think that's how that's supposed to work. Another thing that was kind of part of this extremist belief notion is figuring it out, right? That was kind of the mentality back then. Hey, we want to do more sparring. We want to fight more. We want to learn how to use our stuff. Teach us. We would ask these things. And it was like, just figure it out. Practice more. Practice your form more. And I'm like, can I say that through practicing forms I've gained understanding and capacity to apply my techniques? Sure, every now and again. But it's not consistent, right? Because if I am just practicing movement, right, there's only so many different ways I can visualize it and so many different ways that my brain can interpret the movement. And I can get different perspectives from other people, but it's so different with live resistance that I'm not going to be able to just figure it out, right? And we're talking about systems like Emperor's Long Fist and Northern Shaolin, where they intentionally disguise the application of these movements. So telling me to go figure it out is like telling me to go fuck myself. To me, that's a cop-out. That's a teacher's way of being lazy. And I don't fucking fly with that. All that means to me is that I don't want to teach it. Or the old masters wouldn't have taught us, why would I teach it? And it's like, you're perpetuating the bullshit that makes Kung Fu the way it is today. And this is a big part of why I am the way that I am. Because I cannot stand that nonsense. If I don't understand a movement, I'm going to be straight up about it. Kung Fu has hundreds of techniques. Every style, every form has a whole bunch of different techniques. I don't need to know every single technique like the back of my hand. Should I understand most of it? Yes, but at the end of the day, self-defense, sports, 5 techniques, maybe, right? Let's look at boxing. They don't have a million techniques, maybe 20. I'm sure they have a lot of concept and theory and all these different drills and things to build skill, build power, build speed, all of that. And I'm not even trying to shame that. I think that's great. But it's just like, I don't need a million techniques, right? And I'll be real, I have a few go-tos that's really my bread and butter. I wait until I'm able to use them. And that's simple. Do I have the capacity to use other techniques? Sure. Do I try to? Do I experiment? Absolutely, because I think that's part of the fun. But the more I have to put brain power into thinking, when is the perfect opportunity to use this technique? The more I have to figure it out, the less time I have to develop skill, to develop understanding, to develop all these attributes that a martial art should have. And it's like, how am I supposed to believe that just practicing my forms with no type of insight into what any of this is supposed to be is going to lead me to greater understanding? It's not. Alright, so at this point, we are going through that social isolation component of what makes a cult, or at least the elements of a cult. Alright, so essentially, we were led to believe that, and I touched on this earlier, that we were in a position to, we were better than everybody else. And I can't really say that I ever truly ascribed to this, even back when I was really embedded in it, because it just, I always struggled with self-esteem issues. And a lot of what they wanted us to feel was kind of negated relative to how they treated us. And it was like our family, there were times where we were basically told, like, your family can never understand what you do here, what we do here, what we accomplish here. Your friends, people that are not a part of this immediate community, would never understand the intensity with which we practice. And when I say intensity, I'm not even talking about the actual training, but just the mental devotion to the practice. We're not allowed to really see ourselves as fallible. To an extent, yes, but relative to people outside ourselves, no, not really. And it goes back to what I said earlier, that whole idea of seeing ourselves as superhuman. You know, no such thing as I'm only human, be superhuman. And that kind of puts a lot of weight on your shoulder, because now you have to be perfect, or at least continually strive for perfection. And that in and of itself is stressful. It's not a healthy mentality. It doesn't allow you to accept the fact that you have faults, and it's okay to have faults and fall. Because you can always just rise up again and come back to the challenge. It made it seem like if we failed, it was because of a societal standard or an outsider's perspective that they could not understand our perspective. We were kind of put in a position to be led to feel like we were infallible, and that puts a lot of pressure on us, but it also makes us feel a lot more isolated from the outside world, right? So as a group, we are restricted and confined to the ideals of our group, and we're not advised to, we're frowned upon, or having privileges revoked, or just being treated like you're deviant in some way, is isolating, because either way you go, you're being led to believe that you're off. If I'm totally committed to the group, now I'm isolated and confined to the beliefs, practices, and really whatever the teacher was trying to reinforce. That's what I'm limited to in my purview or life view. Okay. Then, in a personal sense, when it comes to failure and not being able to feel fallible, it puts us on this pedestal where I am infallible. This gives me a responsibility, or this puts me on a place to feel like I have power or status higher than the rest of the people in the community, and not the immediate community, but the outside community, the community that was not a part of the school. And as somebody that has always kind of been an outlier, right? And I'm not trying to make myself sound any like I'm a badass, I do cool shit. No, I was not at all any of those things, but I was just kind of the odd one out, when it came to family gatherings, when it came to making friends. I was always kind of isolated. So that's in my nature. So walking into the school and having already been a socially isolated individual, the isolation that was received was fulfilling in the beginning, because it's like, yes, I'm being put off from this world that I already don't relate to, and confining myself to the beliefs and practices of this institution, of the school. So that was isolating in a good way at the beginning, because it felt like, yes, I have found my home and I don't need the rest. I have found my island of misfit toys. Moving forward, as I progressed, as I started to see a lot more of the bullshit that was happening, it became more of a, now I am the outlier in this group of people that I thought were outliers. When really their philosophy was probably different from a lot of other groups, and the way they operated relative to what I've explained in the last 40 minutes was different, but groups like this exist everywhere. These cult type groups with these toxic behavioral patterns and themes and rituals that they imprint on other people. They're everywhere. You just really gotta know where to look and how to identify it. All that to say, even in that group of people that were perceived anomalies, I became an anomaly inside this group of anomalies because of my choice to rebel against the established norm. So after having felt like I had found my group, my people, the people I would want to socialize with in their respective setting and things like that, I stepped outside of that, because now I'm a socially isolated individual from the rest of the world. Now I'm also isolating myself socially from this part of my world because of how so much of that had negatively affected me, and how it just felt like it wasn't truly servicing people to the best of its capacity. And that they used tools like guilt and shame and manipulation and all of these things to keep people committed. And to really, to keep people committed, but to keep people believing in this practice. You're in a position to be reconditioned because you're stepping outside of your normal social circle, however small that may be. You're stepping into another social circle because you want to feel you belong, or perhaps you just have a lot of bullying issues, or you're overweight. Whatever reason you would step into this facility, you're looking to get a new perspective. You're looking to grow in a certain type of way where you have been perceived to have a deficit. And so you're walking into this with that sponge-like brain of being ready to receive. And these manipulative type things that are being received, they start to stick, especially if you're a kid. You're sitting with all these feelings and you feel like guilty, right? You feel guilty for going out. You feel guilty for spending additional time with groups that don't create value, that don't understand. Because you're part of such a unique group, it might contort your perspective, your view on how we operate, why we operate. So all of that leads to that kind of reliance and dependency on this group for insight. And so many times that was paired with things they had no business working with, right? So if I had health issues, psychological issues, go to your Sifu, right? And they're going to say as a precursor or a caution, like basically adding the caution label to cover their own ass. This is not magic. It doesn't work in one sitting. It doesn't work like this. And, we're not doctors. They would say those things, but then they would make all of these like recommendations and things relative to people's medical health. Oh, you have this, practice these things, and try these alternative types of medicine before you go to regular doctors who are licensed and work in the system. So it became this like, it really was a cult of everything. If you can find a way to meet everybody's needs and condition them to only see your way as the way, and I can't lie, I know adults that are still there that are eating it all up, eating up the magic, eating up the lies, or even if it's not lies but delusions, because they may not be lying. They may truly believe that you can spear through somebody's chest with an iron hand. And sure, that's still not okay, to be spreading delusions, to be having people truly believe that these skills are possible by your hands. Because if those skills were possible by other people's hands, why, what do they have to do to learn? Is it possible to learn these powers? And you really find people that are grown adults getting roped into this stuff, and it's tough, and sometimes I feel like they just stick with it because it's what they know, even though they see the bullshit, and other times it's that hyper dependence that can truly devastate people long term because they're so dependent on this facility for health, for wellness, for happiness, for socialization, for advice, for a place to call their safe haven, and to develop skills that are going to benefit them for the rest of their lives. You can, but you just have to tread carefully, because when people are giving out life-changing information and they get the reinforcement of, oh, this changed my life, oh, this makes me feel great, thank you so much, and they have this gratitude, and they start to build a complex about themselves. Not everybody, but this seems to be the case here. And now they believe they have these supernatural abilities. They believe that they are superior, and they're using that sense of superiority to build a following. The confidence that comes with that sense of superiority can be very charismatic, can be very charming, can truly influence people to follow and abide by your credence. So, just to close out, I really hope that this video sheds some light on my experience for anybody that's had questions, assuming they watch, and I'm sure people are going to watch and invalidate what I'm saying because they're still part of it or they run it, and that's on them. That's their prerogative. But I hope that other people are able to take this and reassess their own situations and suss out whether they're in a similar situation to mine, or hopefully not. But if they are, I hope you can realize it and make the right decisions accordingly. So with that said, I'm not 100% sure what next week's going to be about. I don't know if I'm going to expand on this a little bit more, even though I kind of expanded on this a lot, or move on to something else. So with that said, farewell. I'll see you all in the next one. Thanks for watching this. If you watched the whole thing, kudos to you. You earned some cool points. Catch you later.